No worries.
You're living at a time of extremism. 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 A time of revolution. A time when there's got to be a change. You're living at a time of extremism. A time of revolution. A time when there's got to be a change. People in power have misused, and now there has to be a change. Extreme methods. And you're living at a time of extremism, a time of revolution, a time when there's got to be a change. People in power have misused it, and now there has to be a change, and a better world has to be built, and the only way it's going to be built is with extreme methods. And I, for one, will join in with anyone, don't care what color you are, as long as you want to change this miserable condition that exists on this earth. Thank you.
Wow, y'all, babe. Let's go. Ecstatic. Ecstatic, ecstatic. Classic. Flow. Super magic, black origin, fresh me out of dopeness. Definitely out of dopeness. Sketching other opens. Lock off yourself, Brooklyn. We keep them open. Heavens expand, the stars advance. The love will get mad. Motor hand, healing power like bang. Snap, I rebuke these snitches. We know the truth, you can't confuse me, bitches. Great name, greater than all your riches. Y'all don't say Taco Bay, that's the business. Repeat, I rebuke these snitches. We know the truth, you can't confuse me, bitches. Strong magic to bust all you with this Cherokee cheap. Rock about your rocket, no stopping, let's get it. Yeah. You're now rocking with the devil. Not no. It's like heartbeat. You let me feel so real. Super magic, black origin, freshly out of dopeness. Definitely out of dopeness. Sketching of an opus. Lock off yourself, Brooklyn. We keep them open. Again, super magic, black origin, freshly out of dopeness. Definitely out of dopeness. Sketching of an opus. Lock off yourself, come close and get them open. Give it here, let it go. Ecstasy. Heavens advance, stars advance, the love will be back.
From
right, y'all. Welcome to the show this morning. Welcome to Accented Dialogues in Diaspora. My name is Philip. I'll be helping moderate today. And if y'all could, please drop some clap emojis. Please drop the thumb up reactions and give some love for our in-house DJ, DJ Puzzle. Give it up. Thank you, DJ Puzzle. Shout outs. Welcome everyone to Accented Dialogues in Diaspora. Today we have a super special show for y'all on deck. And I'm just gonna cut to the slide right now. Today's show is Art, Activism, and Advocacy. And what's special about today's show is that we're doing it in collaboration with a couple of our sister orgs, Pivot, the Progressive Vietnamese American organization, and UNAVSA, so please give it up. We'll also be dropping the links to all of the orgs and some of the information that we'll be talking about today in the chat. Before we get started, I also want to highlight the org that has been putting together the Accented series for y'all to enjoy during quarantine. For those of y'all this is your first time at an Accented show, welcome. For those of you who are returning to the show, we hope that you enjoyed our first version of the show called the DVAN Author Talk series that featured Viet Thanh Nguyen, who is the author of the novel The Mountains Sing. After that, we began to release the Accented Dialogues in Diaspora show, and we featured Phuc Trung, who is an author for the memoir Saigon. And then just last week, we had our third Accented show that was titled Vietnamese Representation on Screen and Behind the Scenes, that featured an array of distinguished guests such as Go Kyu Tin, Bao Nguyen, Jenny Chang Lei, and what we refer to as the smart and handsome Viet Nguyen, right? But for today's show, for Art, Activism, and Advocacy, we're going to be talking a little bit about political representation and the intersection of these three things, art, advocacy, and activism, as well as provide a call to action for Vietnamese Americans and Diasporic Vietnamese folks abroad with some of our distinguished guests that we have lined up for y'all tonight. But before we get to that, I want to just spotlight the Diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network for putting this all together. As y'all can see on the slides, some of the events that we have, or we would usually have going on, are small scale to large scale public events. We also do writers retreats for up and coming writers as well that connect them to some of the more veteran writers that are on the scene right now. And then we also hold, in addition to our public events, we also hold events about food, about music, and generally about Vietnamese and Southeast Asian diasporic arts and culture around the world. I don't know if y'all can see on the slide, but that is definitely a durian that some of the DVAN artists featured are eating there in the picture. But without further ado, to kind of pass it on to our host for tonight, he is the well-known author, the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of The Sympathizer, Nothing Ever Dies, The Refugees and Race and Resistance, Literature, Politics in Asian America. His most recent book was Chicken of the Sea, done with his son Ellison, and his next book is The Committed, the sequel to The Sympathizer. Please welcome our host for today, Viet Thanh Nguyen. You are my girl, I just can't get enough. I just can't get enough.
All right, thank you so much, Philip. Thank you, DJ Puzzle. Welcome everybody to Accented Dialogues in Diaspora. The song you just heard was probably occurred sometime before many of you were born. That was Depeche Mode with I Just Can't Get Enough. Love that song, but that was literally from another century. So glad to have you all with us. I do want to shout out to all the kinds of places and cities and states that people are hailing from today. I saw Atlanta, Durham, San Jose, Portland, Toronto, Cleveland, San Diego, Seattle. Someone representing the entire Midwest. Hilo, Philadelphia, Massachusetts, Ohio, New England, Edmonton, Florida, Orange County, Berkeley, Virginia, Texas, Arizona, Dallas, Michigan, Eugene, and Chicago. If I didn't call out your city or state or your region, make sure you tell us where you're from in the chat window. We're really thrilled to have this episode here on Vietnamese American politics. It's a subject that's very close to my heart. I went to school at UC Berkeley, where I was immediately radicalized the moment I stepped foot on campus, became an Asian American and a Vietnamese American, and those passions have never let up for me. They have intersected with my life as a teacher, as a scholar, and as a writer, and as someone who writes op-eds for New York Times and Time Magazine and so on. And of course, now we're living in a time when politics in this country is enormously heated up and also rather divisive. And Vietnamese Americans have not been exempt from the passions that are engulfing this country, as we're going to see in our discussion with our distinguished panel. And I'm really delighted that this panel has not only elected state officials, but also artists and doctors as well. This represents how wide the segment is of the Vietnamese American community that is politically engaged. And our first guest is Tram Nguyen. She is a lawyer and a state legislature, the first Vietnamese American woman elected as a representative to the Massachusetts state legislature, one of the handful of Vietnamese American state level elected politicians that we have. Please give it up for Tram Nguyen. All right. Next, we have Thi Bui. She is a cartoonist and the author of the acclaimed award-winning memoir, The Best We Could Do, which I highly recommend to you. She is also the illustrator for children's books, including A Different Pond with the poet Bao Phi, and Chicken of the Sea with me and her son Hien and my son Ellison. Please give it up for Thi Bui. And last but far from least, someone very near and dear to me, the Dr. Tung Nguyen. He is a professor at the University of California of San Francisco Medical School and also the founder of the first progressive Vietnamese national political organization, Pivot, the Progressive Vietnamese Network. He's also my older brother. Let's hear some love for Tung Nguyen. Well, Forever Young, let's hope that's true. That happened to be the theme song for my high school prom about 40 years ago. So depressing. But here we are. I think we're still all looking reasonably young. We're certainly very, very passionate about our political causes. And again, I'm just thrilled that we have such a broad array of interests here, people who are engaged in political action in the United States, in the Vietnamese American community. It goes to show that while it's very important that we have elected officials like Tram, there are different ways by which we can become politically engaged and connected. And there's so many different areas in which political work is crucial for the Vietnamese American and Asian American communities as well. And I think for Vietnamese Americans, our relationship to politics has been ambivalent, troubled, complicated, and partly that's because of our history as people, for the most part, who have come to the United States fleeing the consequences of the war in Vietnam. And of course, the issues of communism and anti-communism were deeply influential throughout most of the decades of our existence here in the United States, are still important today, as we're going to see. And for the earlier generations, I think the definition of politics was very much oriented around our relationship to Vietnam and to communism. And I remember growing up being discouraged by my parents in terms of getting involved in politics, because it's a dangerous thing in Vietnam and also a dangerous thing here in the United States to be involved in politics in the Vietnamese American community. But with a newer generation raised here in the United States or born here in the United States, there's a greater inclination to get engaged with politics, not only the politics dealing with Vietnam, but most especially the politics of being American and being citizens and being residents of this country. And so I'd like to start off by asking each of you, how did you become involved politically, whatever area that happened to be? So let's start off with Tram. How did you become involved politically, and take us through your path to becoming an elected state official in Massachusetts?
Hi, everyone. Really so honored to be on this esteemed panel with all of you today. And I can't agree with you more, Viet. This is such a, we're at a crossroads in our country. And it is so important for all of us to talk about civic engagement and how we as individuals can contribute to that conversation and make sure that we're working with one another to amplify our own voices, as well as amplify the voices of those who are vulnerable and marginalized. And for me, I'm sure like many of you here, I came to the United States as political refugees with my family when I was 5 years old. My father served in the South Vietnam military and served 8 years in a re-education camp under communism. And so for me, politics really has been a part of my life since even before I stepped foot into the United States. And in coming here, we came to Massachusetts. I know many of you are from California, and it's great. I do have a lot of family there, and the dynamics are a little bit different than in the West Coast for sure. As someone who came to a city of immigrants here in Lawrence, called Lawrence in Massachusetts, and like you, my family were very hesitant to, encourage political engagement. My whole life, I thought I was going to be a doctor, and so great to see Dr. Tung Nguyen here. But my passion for social justice and social change started in college. Just like with anything else, many of us got exposure to different people, to to the lessons that we missed out in high school. And I think that there is that movement right now to try to put in not only civic engagement or civics lessons in high school and middle schools, but also to add in studies on racial justice and social justice and what it means to try to dismantle systemic and institutional racism. And those are the classes that we missed out. And so I got exposure to them when I got into college and realized that maybe my passion wasn't in medicine. My passion was to try to find my own voice and help others find their voices. And so I started looking into other career opportunities or just even an inkling of where I wanted to go. And what I found out was there is a whole other world out there that I just never knew about or thought of. I never thought to even go into law school because the only lawyers I knew were those I saw in SVU, Law and Order. But then I got exposure to the world of legal services with attorneys who use the law to fight for the most vulnerable people in our communities and work on policies that would allow us to address inequities in our communities and state and nation. And I really truly admired their work and decided to follow in that footstep. So I just decided to go to law school. I went to Tufts, got a internship with this organization, and then decided to go to law school to work with Great Boston Legal Services. And that's actually one of the organizations that I will highlight later. But they do great work trying to change policy, but also directly represent people. And after law school, I got to represent victims of domestic violence, seniors, veterans, people with disabilities, survivors of domestic violence, particularly new immigrants. And that was when my involvement with politics became much more entrenched. I started working on policy at the State House to be an advocate for particular changes like paid family medical leave, raising the minimum wage, and making sure that we're putting in protections and resources for those who need them. And in that work, I met other elected officials who asked me if I were interested in getting involved in politics. And at that time, my state representative was a full-on Trump-supporting Republican who really opposed every single thing that I was fighting for and refused to meet with me for 2 full years when I tried to reach out to him. And for me, that's really just unacceptable. To represent the people, you have to listen to the people, even if you end up disagreeing with them. And that's what I'm committed to, is being available and accessible to the people to actually explain to them why I vote for a certain thing, why I don't agree with them on a certain thing. But at the end of the day, it's about having these conversations. And so my path to politics was really by happenstance. I didn't think ever that I was going to run for office, but because of my engagement and activism, I was pulled into this during the 2018 election when women were running across the state and winning. And I came in with a class of 25 people, half of them to get into politics and be able to work on the substantial changes that you want to see. And so, and today too, as well, I just want to point out that if at any given moment I could be pulled away to vote, we're working on a police reform bill in response to the Black Lives Matter movement. And so I'm just so honored to have this opportunity to be able to work on one of the most robust bills in the nation to make sure that we work to address police brutality and help build trust between community members and law enforcement. And
Yeah.
so that was my path to politics. And this year I'm running for re-election again. And like what Viet was saying earlier, it's not just elected officials who need to get people to be civically engaged. I would not be here if it were not for the support of my family members, as well as others, including organizations like Pivot and so many others who try to help candidates like me, especially people of color. And so I'm thrilled to be here with you all. And I look forward to sharing more with you and hearing more of the stories of my fellow panelists. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Jum. And Philip, be sure to put a link into the chat for donations to Jum's political campaign. That's very, very important, people. I know, I know we Vietnamese people tend to not donate politically to political causes or art causes as much as we should, but politicians can't run campaigns without money. Arts organizations like DVAN can't exist without donations from you as well. Now, I gotta say one thing, which is that this is our first and hopefully last time doing a morning show, okay? Because this is 10:30 in the morning in California, but for Viet time, it's like 6 in the morning. I don't even get up till noon. So I totally forgot to ask all of our panelists to engage in our usual custom, which on a Friday night sounds a little bit more acceptable, of sharing what kind of a drink that you've brought to this occasion. Usually we do this on Friday nights. We have a lot of fun. We get a little boozy. We share our creative cocktails and everything. In my case, I have a blackberry smash. I went all out for you guys. I just want to toast to the causes that Jum has brought up, especially this bill about police reform that she is engaging in the Massachusetts state legislature. Of course, it's one of the most important things that we can start to see today as a consequence of Black Lives Matter and this radical conversation that we're having about what the police should be, what the police should do. Should they be reformed or should they be defunded? Very, very volatile and crucial questions. But anyway, here's my blackberry smash. Jum, did you bring something for us on this occasion?
I really wish, but I don't think I should be drinking while I'm working on police reform.
That is the correct response. I just wanted to give you a softball. T, what about you?
Oops, sorry.
I think T might have already started. Oh, there it is. T, turn on your audio. Tell us what that is. T, turn on your audio.
Oh, you're muted, T.
Rookie move. It's just a coffee that's a little more exciting.
We sort of missed a moment where you poured that bottle of Jack Daniels into your coffee. All right. Tung, what are you having?
I don't believe in props. I already had 2 cups of coffee. I can't drink any more coffee.
Okay, basically now you understand the difference.
When I get drunk, I get a red face, so I can't do it.
So now you understand the difference between the 2 brothers, all right? That's Tung, this is me, all right. Philip, what do you got for us?
I have a Viet iced coffee, but it's spiked with Hennessy.
Oh my God.
The only way to start a Friday morning with you all.
I have never done that. I got to try that. What about you, DJ Puzzle? Did you bring something for us?
Same thing as Philip. Good old Viet coffee, slowly drip with a little bit of a little bit of whiskey in there.
Got it. I got to try that too. All right. Okay, so our next guest is Thi Bui, and she is a cartoonist, like I mentioned. And you wouldn't imagine cartoonist and politics in the same breath, but that in fact is a lot of what Thi has done. Thi, talk to us about that. I mean, talk about what your relationship, how did you become politicized, and how do you see your relationship as an artist to politics, whether it's in your art or whether it's in the political causes that you become very engaged in?
I think I was always politically minded or civics minded since I was a kid. Like I was that kid who, like, if I didn't like you as class president, I might start a petition against you. I think I wrote that down in a diary entry in the 5th grade. And I was always, involved in like student government and the environmental movement in junior high school, but I got discouraged a lot. Like I would go outside and start to pick up trash, and my parents would tell me, "Don't touch the trash." Or in college, I got really, really involved in grassroots organizing, and my family had an intervention with me because I was spending more time, canvassing people on Sproul Plaza than going to class. And then in art school, I got in trouble a lot for making work that was too narrative when I was studying sculpture. So I think just eventually, that picture is me bugging people on Sproul Plaza when I was in college 25 years ago. So I think it's just eventually I figured out that actually I am political. I make art. I tell stories. And so that's what I do now. And I think that's what I was trying to do when I was a kid, but it just took me a long time to figure out who I was.
And tell us about your artwork. I read The Best We Could Do. By the way, those of you who have not read The Best We Could Do, it's a memoir about Vietnamese refugee life. And it covers the whole refugee experience from what happened in Vietnam to the United States. And of course, I'm a writer, and I think that writing about our experiences as Vietnamese Americans and as refugees is a political act, because our very existence in this country is defined politically. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the war in Vietnam. No matter what your perspective is on that war, what side you take, what kind of explanations you have about the war and its consequences, we wouldn't be here without that war. That's a political event. And so our very existence in this country is a constant reminder to us and to our fellow Americans about a war. And we have striven mightily to say Vietnam is a country and not a war. And yet, nevertheless, that history is with us. So when we write about our experiences in the war or as refugees, it is political because it works against the way that Americans have chosen to remember the Vietnam War, which is a war about Americans, right, even though it was the Vietnamese, the Cambodians, the Laotians, and the Hmong who paid the largest price in terms of lives lost, in terms of everything that was lost during that war. So it's crucial to foreground what we've been through. Can you talk about The Best We Could Do and what your political ambitions were for that work?
Yeah, I was a grad student and very angry about most of the representations of the Vietnam War that I came across in American scholarship as well as American films. I watched every Vietnam War movie there was, and I hated almost all of them because my role in them as a Vietnamese woman was just to either get killed or be a prostitute, and just, enact the worst kind of stereotypes about Vietnamese people. Even though, as you say, Vietnamese people and other Southeast Asians who experienced that war paid the greatest price. So I wanted to tell a different story which centered Vietnamese people, and do it in a way that I felt like hadn't been done before. So it was a very political act. I just Trojan horsed it into a really pleasing looking book that comes across as a personal story, but there's actually quite a bit of historical research and my own political stances within it.
It's a beautiful book, by the way. I just really loved it. And then lastly, besides these kinds of issues, you've also become involved in working on issues around prisoners and deportation. And these are really crucial issues for Southeast Asian Americans at this time. Can you tell us more about your work in those areas?
Yeah, this was work that I got pulled into by lawyers who were defending Vietnamese, Cambodian, and other Southeast Asian refugees in the US who'd lived here for decades, some of them, but who were under the Trump administration in the fall of 2017, getting rounded up in like unprecedented numbers. And the Vietnamese community really had no idea what to do. There was still a lot of shame and stigma about having anybody, being held in detention. And most of the time with our folks, they're in detention because they have already served prison time, or they're still in prison and then getting transferred directly to ICE for deportation, because in the 90s we passed some laws that really expanded the mass incarceration system, and also expanded like the kinds of crimes that would qualify you for expulsion from the country. So a lot of people who came as children, as babies, as refugees like us, then ended up being like stateless, basically, while they were in prison, which is another form of statelessness. And it was just a really hopeless situation for a minute, until we were able to gather more people behind it. So, you know, it was a lawyer, an Asian American lawyer who tweeted at me, and another Asian American lawyer who was fighting over in Atlanta, Georgia, who pulled me into this work. And I started just a little bit at a time doing like a profile, a portrait, and then I realized that I had to use storytelling and historical research to kind of make sense for it for myself, and also retell it for other people, because it is a complicated thing, but it doesn't have to be. And the deeper I got, the more I realized that I had to convince my publisher to let me switch my book topic, which was about something completely different, to be about Southeast Asians, Asian Americans in the deportation system.
Yeah. So I think this is a really crucial issue, because what we've seen in the past few years of the Trump administration is a gradually increasing level of persecution of people that the Trump administration perceives to be others. And that started off with obviously Mexicans and Latinos and undocumented immigrants. And then it extended to refugees and deporting adoptees and refugees as well. So I think the Trump administration has been testing out its anti-immigration policies on the most vulnerable populations first. And we're starting to see the consequences of that within the United States. We look at Portland, for example, and the federal police officers that are being deployed in Portland are the same federal police officers who are being used to police our borders and our customs and security and enforcement. So I think there's a crucial relationship here between how this country treats its undocumented immigrants, its prisoners, its refugees, everybody that it perceives as others, and then how it's going to treat domestic politics within the United States. So our next guest, Dr. Tung Nguyen, has become increasingly involved in these domestic politics in the United States. And let me just tell you a little story about Dr. Tung Nguyen, which is that when we were growing up, or not when we were growing up, by the time we were in college and beyond, I was considered, I believe, to be the radical one in the family. I was one who went to Berkeley. I was the one who got arrested on campus for political protest, and Tung was the more sensible one. Became a doctor, became a professor, became a researcher in Vietnamese and Asian American community health issues, became so well known for what he was doing there that under the Obama administration, he was appointed to be the co-chair of the Asian American and Pacific Islander Commission for the White House. And then Trump was elected, and Tung resigned from his position as the head of that commission and became much more radical than me. It's been an interesting transition. So I'd like to know more about this transformation of political consciousness for you, my older brother. What happened there to turn you into, from a sensible doctor into a still sensible doctor, but a committed political advocate who started Pivot, our first national progressive Vietnamese organization?
Yeah, you're my role model, man. That's why I got activated and became an activist, you know. I'll start actually with the same story that a lot of people did, which is that it's great to be a part of the UNAVSA meeting, because I helped to start actually 2 Vietnamese student associations, one at college and one in medical school. And they were both like 3 people or something. So that's how old and how long ago that's been. But one of the things that we did when we started those Vietnamese student organizations, I think they're still true, is that we said that we were not going to do any politics, because we were all, this is back in the 80s, you know, people were getting shot and killed for doing political talk in Vietnamese American communities. So we did not want that divisiveness. So we basically were having fun. We were having parties and all that stuff. And then when I became a doctor, I became an advocate. I mean, you can't be a good doctor without advocating for your patients, you know. You're advocating for them to them, but you're also advocating for them to the healthcare system. And then also because of my family, I think, you know, they're immigrants and they're refugees. They had trouble accessing the healthcare system. And so, you know, recognizing these problems, I had to be advocate for them too. And then eventually becoming an advocate for my patients who are Vietnamese Americans. Eventually, though, it became very clear that focusing on individual change by talking to them or giving them drugs or whatever was not going to get people to be a lot healthier. You have to actually look at sort of the underlying causes of why people are unhealthy or can't become healthy or are sick. And for Asian American and Vietnamese American in particular, the big issue has always been lack of data, lack of any data. We were invisible. There was not even any Asian American data in health data in the 1980s. It's not like we were there and we were not disaggregated. We were just not there. We were zero or other, okay? So So for us to even get data collected, you have to be an advocate because people weren't collecting it. People weren't, making policies. So a lot of us doing health research and healthcare had to become advocates. And then finally, in terms of a health situation, the underlying causes of health disparities are things like economics, poverty, racism, political inequality, and all those things require advocacy and political action to change. I would say the last thing that I would do is, in relation to what you just said, was I've always, as an advocate, looked to people like Jum or people in government to help us. Like we would go and say, well, geez, all we have to do is to convince the legislators, the executive people to help us. And then when I became a part of the Obama's White House Commission on Asian American and Pacific Islanders, what I realized was they were looking at me to advocate for them. So the government people also had their hands tied in certain ways, and they were looking at the community to do that. And that's when the light went on. I understood that you need an inside game, you need an outside game, you need a community game, you need a government game, and then you have to really organize and then get the right people in place. So if I talk to Jum about Asian American issue, we don't have to start with the preliminaries. We don't have to start with, oh, this is our experience, this is the lack of data. We don't have to do that. We just have to talk about which action we're gonna take, right? Most of my conversation with non-Asian politicians and government people is, we are a diverse group. We're a growing community. We have to precede it with all of this stuff, and before we even get to the point of trying to make change. So this is why we started doing a lot of the things that we're doing, because we need to organize, we need to have an overall plan, and we need to approach this as a team.
You've also been involved with Democratic Party politics, obviously, and in organized events along with the National Democratic Party. But you felt that perhaps the National Democratic Party has not paid sufficient attention to Vietnamese specifically, but also Asian Americans in general. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, no, that's just part of the game. I mean, part of the game is to help the right candidates win, but also to do it in a way that they recognize that we help them win and they owe us. Because for generations, the Democrat, I mean, this, Black Americans say this all the time, the Democratic Party takes them for granted. They don't win without minorities, but when they get into power, they don't spend time or policy that improves minority situation. And Asian American in particular is really, really low down on that list. So we can't just be giving money as individual or doing time or getting voter engagements as individual with some other big organization. If you do that, your contribution is never going to be recognized. Your community is never going to be recognized. I'm actually not a Democrat on principle. I mean, I'm an independent because I do not feel like I'm being co-opted in the Democratic Party. I pretty much vote Democrat and I do support our Democratic candidates, but I refuse to become a part of the Democratic Party until their policies toward Asian Americans and minorities reflect our contributions and our needs.
All right, great. That's what I want to hear. Now, I have a question for all of you, which is, what do you think are the most crucial issues facing Vietnamese, Southeast Asian, and Asian Americans today, especially in the run-up to the elections that are coming up in November of this year?
I'm going to chime in here and say I completely agree with Dr. Nguyen on disaggregated data. This is also, interestingly, an amendment that we just filed in the Massachusetts legislature now to make sure that we're talking about the differences among the Asian ethnic groups. I mean, we don't have a unifying language. Some of us are newer immigrants than others. And when you look at the stats and you're looking at graduation rates from high school, graduation rates from college, and even our health disparities, we need to have this data to make sure that we are fully representing the spectrum of Asian Americans. I mean, myself and many of you as Vietnamese American refugees, our history and how we got here and just the details about our communities are very different from the Chinese American community or the Japanese American community. And so it's important to have the disaggregated data, but also to talk about how to get Asian Americans and Vietnamese Americans to be more involved in politics. When we're looking at a poll from 2016, I think 63% 3% of white Americans typically vote. For AAPIs, it's around 49, 50 something percent. So there's a huge, at least a 10 percentage point difference. And that makes a huge difference. For me, I represent Andover, North Andover, Tewksbury, and Boxford. You've never heard of these towns because they're very white. 90% of my constituents are white Americans. And who are the people talking to me? And who are the people talking to my colleague who represents mostly a Vietnamese American community? No Vietnamese American ever goes to her to talk to her about the issues that matter to them. So what percolates to the top are the issues that I'm hearing from my white constituents, not the people, not the folks from the Vietnamese American community. So disaggregated data, engagement, and also in talking about policies, democratic policies that would benefit our community. It seems as though the majority of our community are Republican, and they hang on to this notion that Republicans tend to care more about their issues, they're more anti-communist, but the reality of it is that our communities here need help. We need resources. We need programs like, I don't know, more funding for education, universal health care, assistance for college loan debts, all of these things which are more democratic issues, and we need to start talking about them more. And I saw in the chats that you all mentioned Kathy Tran, B. Nguyen, Joe Nguyen, the senator, all of amazingly wonderful people who've inspired me to run, and we hope that we will continue to build a pipeline to inspire more of you to run as well. It's just been such an honor getting to know all the Vietnamese American elected officials across the state. We need more of you. I'm the only one. I'm the only Vietnamese American in the House and the first Vietnamese American woman ever elected. I don't want to be the only one, and I want to make sure that not only are we helping people to get into politics, but also just to be involved in campaigns, be a staffer at the State House, so you know the policies and make sure that the things that we're addressing at the State House, for instance, right now, we're responding to the coronavirus and everyone needs help. We are at 17% unemployment, and I have to remind them every single day, did you translate that into Vietnamese? Did you make sure that you're reaching out to the people, small businesses in the community, to let them know of the resources that are available, to seniors, to just anyone in the community, to let them know what resources are available to them. That's my job, is to constantly remind them, but I should not be the only one. So we need more of us across the nation to remember, to be able to do this and remind folks that we are here when we have a voice.
No, absolutely. And, now that we have started to see young Vietnamese Americans get elected to political office, I'm sure we'll have more inspiration for other people to start thinking about their own campaigns. So T and Tung, what do you think are the pressing issues facing our communities today?
Obviously, I care a lot about immigration detention and deportation, which affects, over 12,000 Vietnamese Americans and many more Southeast Asians in general. But I think that the other thing that connects many issues for me is that we're such a growing population in the US. Like if you look at the second most spoken language in so many states, it's Vietnamese. I found out there are more Vietnamese speakers in the US than there are French speakers, but you wouldn't know that from the infrastructure for learning languages in the US. So I feel like we're at this pivotal point, sorry to play on that word, but we're at this pivotal point where we need to be figuring out our political identity and asserting it. We do have a history of voting mostly Republican, but that has shifted quite a bit under Trump. And there is this progressive buildup inside the Vietnamese American community that's really important to assert right now. I think that, within the Asian American context, we are hugely underrepresented and pretty different from more established Asian American communities. But within a Southeast Asian context, we also need to recognize our privilege as Vietnamese folks. It's kind of unpopular for me to say this, but I'll say it anyway, is that in a Southeast Asian context, Vietnamese people are kind of like the white people of Southeast Asia. And it is important for us to recognize that we are ahead of Hmong communities, Laotian communities, Cambodian communities in terms of representation in politics, in the arts, in media, as well as in financial wealth. So when we recognize that, I think that we open up our spaces like this one to pull in our Southeast Asian brothers and sisters to build a stronger community too. So that kind of identity, I guess, foundational work is a big part of what I think about as political work for us right now.
Wow, we are the white people of Southeast Asia. And I think that's basically true, although I think we should focus a little bit more and say that even within Vietnam, some of us are members of the ethnic majority from Vietnam, the Kinh, and we are the white people of Vietnam itself, right? And there are so many different kinds of ethnic minority populations within Vietnam, as well as ethnic Chinese people. And the reason why Vietnamese people are the white people of Vietnam is because of the history of colonization, French colonization, and the fact that we Vietnamese people were elevated by the French to serve them in their colonial bureaucracy, both within France, but also in Cambodia and Laos. And that is a problematic position to occupy, which we should definitely acknowledge. And the ramifications have extended all the way here to the United States with the overrepresentation of Vietnamese people speaking for Southeast Asians in general. So we may be underrepresented as a whole in the context of the United States, but within the context of Southeast Asia or the so-called Indo-Chinese, we certainly have more of our voice being heard today. Tung, what do you think are the pressing issues facing our communities?
So, I just want to remind everyone that even during the Obama administration, there are a lot of us who thought, hey, it doesn't matter who's running the country. It's all the same, and I just have to tell you that in February 2017, within about 3 weeks after Trump took office, I resigned from the API Commission because I knew that there was nothing I could do in any domain that I care about, whether it's disaggregated data, healthcare access, immigrant rights, when that guy is in office, okay? And as soon as we stopped that, we started Pivot because we decided that that's all there is. So for the next 3 months, 4 months, the only thing that matters to Vietnamese American progressive is the election. Okay, that's the only thing that matters because it drives everything else that matters. So, T talks about immigration and deportation. Jum talks about disaggregation. All of that stuff goes nowhere when the executive branch is run by a man who does not listen to advice, does not listen to science, does not listen to communities and minorities, period. And so I think that's what we do. And then after that, when Biden wins, then we can work on all the topics that we care about. But I do also want to say that sometimes we disaggregate too much, okay? Disaggregation is for understanding and for specific action. Collective action is what changes the world. So I think, again, collectively with all Southeast Asian, collectively with all Asian American, collectively with all minorities, that's what we need to be doing. In terms of specific issues that I care about, right now, obviously health and healthcare disparities, huge problem with COVID and the economics of it. Data on Asian Americans are completely lacking. The way they're collecting the data is completely inadequate. We know that our community is not getting tested. We think they're not getting treated well, again, because of language access and healthcare access issues. So one big issue, immigration, I totally agree with. Public charge, what we want when Biden wins is on day one of his taking office to issue the executive order to remove the public charge rule, which attacks legal immigrants. So there are lots of other things we can talk about, but those are the things I'm focused on right now.
Yeah. Before we take our intermission and go into the questions from the audience, I do have a big question to ask all of you, and that is, the relationship of Vietnamese Americans to Black Lives Matter. Now, the murder of George Floyd and the ensuing, eruption of protests and marches in the streets of this city, streets of this country, which are still ongoing today, has transformed this country, but also transformed, I think, Vietnamese American politics. You see much more vocal action on the part of Vietnamese Americans in different ways to support or to oppose Black Lives Matter. We've seen controversies erupt in various ways. I'd really love to hear your take on the stance of Vietnamese Americans towards Black Lives Matter. I know that it's touched some of you personally. For example, Jum, I know that you came out in support of Black Lives Matter and you suffered a backlash from some segments of the Vietnamese American community. We've seen that happen in other places in this country as well, where Vietnamese Americans who have stood up for Black Lives Matter have been targeted and harassed by fellow Vietnamese Americans. And it's probably not a coincidence that, that some of the most vocal antagonisms have been directed at women, not only women, but certainly some of the most vocal protests have been directed against women. And I think it testifies to the depths of not just anti-Black feeling within some parts of the Vietnamese American community, but also deep levels of sexism and misogyny and patriarchy as well. So would love to hear, you know, what you think is happening right now with the Vietnamese American community and Black Lives Matter.
Go ahead, Tram.
Oh, okay, I was just gonna let you go first, since I've gone first many times already. Well, first of all, thank you to, I know at least Dr. Nguyen and also Viet here both have come out to be outspoken in defense of me and so many others. And I think that really has been the silver lining of what has happened in terms of the backlash. So just to give some context, I did do a video not only in support of Black Lives Matter, but to call all APIs to really disown the model minority myth that has been used to wedge us against other communities of color for just too long. And so this video was meant for my constituents. And like I mentioned before, my constituents are mostly white folks. And so it was very surprising to me that the video was pretty silent for quite some time. And then all of a sudden, this really conservative, Trump-supporting Vietnamese American who lives in New Hampshire, not anywhere even near where I represent, decided to share that with her 5,000 Trump-supporting followers. And I got this onslaught of ad hominem attacks, just really angry vitriol thrown not only at me, but also at my family, accusing us, among other things, that, you know, we're communists, we're supporting communism, we're supporting socialism. For me, it doesn't make any sense to me, because we came here to fight for democracy, freedom, and all the values that, you know, are this country is founded on, is to speak up and really fight against tyranny or a government that does not work for you. And so I feel like I'm supporting this very work of us standing together with other communities of color to speak up against police brutality, to make sure that we're fighting and speaking up against the violence and racism that's targeting Black and brown people, but also at us. Just look at what happened after the coronavirus outbreak, and we had the person up top calling this the Kung flu, or calling this the China flu. And then we saw a rise in anti-Asian sentiments. And so with that, the fact that we as a community have faced racism, we know what that's like. And we can't fight against the racism against our community while standing complicit in a system that criminalizes, dehumanizes, and brutalizes our Black friends and neighbors. And so my support of this is not only through my work before as an attorney fighting for civil rights and human rights, but now it continues in my job as a legislator. As I mentioned to you, right now, this very moment, we're working on one of the most robust police reform bills in the nation. Massachusetts is one of the first legislatures to take on this issue. And I'm very thankful for the speaker, and as well as my colleagues, for making sure that we prioritize this before our session ends exactly 1 week from today on July 31st. So we're trying to get this done to make sure that we're standing with our Black and brown friends, neighbors, and family members, and to make sure that we are working towards dismantling the systemic institutional racism that affects us every single day. And I want to use Black Lives Matter as a gateway for us to address biases generally in our country, and make sure that we work on things to allow for everyone to have access, to have equal access, and have equality for all. And I think that the Black Lives Matter movement is a major step in the right direction in demolishing all biases against all groups, including our own community, the Vietnamese American community. And so I encourage you all to continue to speak up, because I genuinely believe that this is a very small minority, very vocal, but small minority of our community. And what I've seen is just so many others coming out in support of me. I'm so thankful for that. And I hope that you will continue to come out in support of elected officials, especially Vietnamese Americans, who are standing in support of this fight for equal justice for all.
Thanks, John. What about you and Tung or T, relationship with the Vietnamese American community to Black Lives Matter?
I can start. I can go for it in a second, I guess. The most important thing I will say is that from a purely self-interest point of view, Vietnamese American and Asian Americans should support Black Lives Matter, because the underlying structures in this country that cause us problems everywhere we look is the same underlying structures that cause the problems for Black Americans. So it's just from a purely self-interest point of view. I'm not trying, you know, I'm coming from a world where when you're talking to a patient, talking to them about what happens in the outside world doesn't matter as much as what's happening to them and their family. And so I do want to make sure that argument is made. It's not just a matter of allyship and social justice, it's a matter of self-interest. The second thing is that we have to understand that, you know, Asian Americans are set aside as a model minority, not accidentally. We were done it, there's a concerted conservative white movement to split the civil rights movement, okay? So when we put ourselves in opposition to Black Lives Matter or not supporting Black Lives Matter, we are actually tools, we're actually puppets of conservative whites. We're not, we are being manipulated very, very much. And without understanding the history and the actions that happen. So number one, do it because it's good for us, do it because it's good for social justice and allyship, but also do it because you can't be puppets.
Thanks so much, T. What about you?
Yeah, I'm totally down to dismantle the model minority myth. It has been a tool to divide and conquer and pit you know, minority groups against each other. It has been from the beginning. And we're latecomers into the Asian American community, but we get played the same way. But the thing is, like, the model minority myth doesn't even make sense for Vietnamese Americans, for Southeast Asians, because so many of us as refugees were settled into very poor, crime-ridden neighborhoods with like terrible schools and you know, problems at home, including domestic violence, drug abuse, broken families. And so many of us did not live model minority lives. And I realized that when my story is put out there, it does look like a model minority narrative that casts a long shadow on like many of the people that I've been interviewing for my current work. And so I want to shine a light on their stories, which don't look like model minority myths at all. And they're Vietnamese, they're Southeast Asian. And they've been through prison and sentenced to overly long sentences as juveniles, but sentenced as adults. You know, they've been punished twice because they weren't born in this country. So after they serve their prison sentences, they get lined up to get shipped out of the country, which they wouldn't be if they had been born in the US. So this is a situation that applies to Vietnamese people as well. And so some of the goals of the Black Lives Matter movement are defunding the police, decriminalizing poor neighborhoods of color, abolition, and these things make sense also for our people as well.
All right, thanks so much to all of you for your responses on that question. Obviously, I do believe that Vietnamese Americans should stand with and stand up for Black Lives Matter. We're not innocent in the racial dynamics of this country. I think many Vietnamese Americans and Vietnamese refugees feel that they are discriminated against, that they have suffered from the experiences of the war, and they don't necessarily have a great degree of empathy for other populations in this country, especially for African Americans and Black people. You see that sentiment a lot, that we came here as Vietnamese refugees, no one helped us, and we became successful. Why can't other people do the same thing? And of course, such a response means that we completely ignore the history of this country. We ignore the fact that when immigrants and refugees come to this country, even though they may have to start on a lower rung of society, on the average, they're going to be standing on the shoulders of Black people, that they won't be experiencing the same kinds of racism that Black people experience, and that the fact that they are not Black is as important of an issue as the fact that they happen to be Vietnamese or Asian or the so-called model minority. Not enough is said about that to try to reinforce this kind of education with our fellow Southeast Asians, especially Vietnamese people, given this panel. So please speak up, stand up, don't be silent. Start with your friends, your family, your neighbors, and then of course become politically engaged in movements as well. We'll continue this conversation in the Q&A There are many interesting questions that many of you have had, but we're going to take an intermission here for a few minutes to replenish our drinks. As you can see, I've had my blackberry smash, and this has 2 ounces of bourbon in there. Maybe I will replenish. But for the next 3 minutes, DJ Puzzle will be entertaining us with his mixes and his turntable. So go refresh your drinks, come back in 3 minutes, or stay here and listen to DJ Puzzle.
style for the 9-pound, etc. Measured contents against the best concoction of catchy phrases. The outcome of your mind is ageless and yours is senseless. Kids from the UK to LA, throw pinch kisses at me. Bahama-D, the epitome of MC.
Let's give it up one time. Let's give it up one time for DJ Puzzle, our in-house DJ. Shout outs to DJ Puzzle. I'm gonna go ahead and screen share. Yes, please hit him with some reacts in the chat. Also, I'm gonna go ahead and plug him, visit him, check him out at PUTTL3 on Instagram. Also check out Secret Sidewalk Music. They've got a new song out called We Don't Speak the Same Language, and I feel like on our conversation about Black Lives Matter, on our conversation about misinformation, how this conversation has become very intergenerational, multi-generational, right? And how the demographics of our audiences, I mean, we've got a lot of UNAVSA folks out here. We've got a lot of folks from the community. We've also got a lot of OGs. Shout out to Tung. So please go ahead and check out DJ Puzzle. Before we go into the Q&A, I want to also highlight the orgs that are co-sponsoring this morning's Accented Dialogues and Diaspora show. Of course, we have DVAN. Please follow us on Instagram and on Twitter at @weare_DVAN. Also, if y'all have the means, please go ahead and visit that bit.ly to donate. I also want to highlight the Pivot Network at pivot.org on Instagram, and you can go ahead and contribute at pivotnetwork.org/contribute. We're also doing a mask fundraiser. If you need that mask, because masks are so essential to life right now, right? You can get 3 masks for the low price of $10 if you donate to Pivot. And also, I want to say that this co-sponsorship is also occurring at the same time as UNAVSA's Connecting with Us virtual experience weekend. So we have a lot of conference attendees with us today. Shout outs to all of you, the next generation of folks that are going to be participating in this activism and advocacy work, right? So please tag at UNAVSA and visit unavsa.org/donate to contribute to the work that UNAVSA is doing. With that, we're going to move on to the question and answer. And so if y'all have been following along on the Zoom webinar, there's a Q&A function. And when you all answer or submit questions, you have the ability to thumbs up them. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll start off with the highest question that has been thumbs up from Kelly Tran to all of the panelists for today. Kelly asks, what approach would you recommend to talk to parents with different political views while also being respectful of the traumas they have faced from the war? I'm going to Tung. I saw your hand raised.
Yeah, so there are many ways of doing it, and we have a bunch of different strategy. But actually, to link this whole conversation about art, I think storytelling is the way to go. I think one of the trouble that we get into is we start shouting at each other and making different points of view. And when you start doing that, you don't convince anyone of anything. The way to get to it, I think, is to talk to your parents or your elders about their experiences and what they got out, what they felt it was difficult for them, and how they think things happen that way. And then from there, that's the entryway into why some of the things that we work on matter so much with poverty and racism and all of that. The worst that will come out of it is you get some nice stories from your parents. So you don't actually end up having a fight. You actually have sort of a nice conversation and get a good story.
Yeah, I would agree. I spent 10 years listening to my parents tell their stories. And it was really instrumental in events with my family, because they understand that I know where they're coming from. I know where their trauma is situated. I know what they've been through and their generation has been through. So I'm not gonna just dismiss it based on what I know about life here, because I don't know much about them. I do know a lot about them, and they know that. So that mutual respect is foundational work that I think you have to, if you're going to engage your parents with very different political opinions than yours. I mean, I'm lucky that mine are like, we already had some bridges in place. for me to talk to them. But I think, you know, when my mom listens to me now, and she's already signed petitions that I'm forwarding to her, you know, to arrest Breonna Taylor's killers, for example, you know, I forwarded her something and I'm like, you may have heard about George Floyd, but maybe you haven't heard about this woman. She's like, oh, I already signed that. Or I can get her to like agree to canvass people for canvass for political candidates in Vietnamese. That's the kind of thing that like my 80-year-old mother will do now, because I understand something about her background and where she comes from and her history.
Along that same note, one of the questions that we got from Cara Nguyen is that her parents hate talking about their past as refugees. So she never really got to learn much about their experiences in past, right? So she wanted to ask you all, what do you feel like is the best way to connect with them? Or how do you have any strategies for getting them to open up in a non-pushy way?
I get asked this one a lot. I think you have to just keep asking them, but you know, sometimes it helps to just ask about a specific thing and don't try to ask like big meaningful questions. Just ask like, what were you wearing on the day that you left Vietnam? Like, you know, the more concrete, the easier it is to answer. If you try to answer somebody's big question about your own life, you're not going to be able to answer it, right? So put yourself in the shoes of your parents. Like, they can't do this big complex analysis of their lives for you, like over breakfast. So you should ask them more concrete questions and let that build up over time into like a bigger story. Maybe you could like come up with some theories of your own, and then you just sort of share your theories about them with them, and then they can respond. And that was pretty much my process for writing my parents' story. The other thing you can do is like ask about a specific photograph. Artifacts are really nice things to talk about. Or if your parents are really uncomfortable looking at you and having you look at them, just do something next to them, like cook next to them, and then, you know, drop little questions on them, pepper them with interview questions in a situation where they actually know they're.
I completely agree with that. And I also I guess I have an advantage in that I, you know, ran for office. So I really didn't need to know my story. But throughout my childhood and growing up, I would continue to do book reports or project reports to have to talk about my history. So my parents feel like they have to tell me because it will help with my education. So I give them a reason to open up. And I've used those stories, especially now while I'm in politics and trying to respond to particular issues and concerns. I would ask very directed questions to my father, especially my father, who was you know, in the re-education camp, to say, you know, can you explain to me why they think this way? Because you've gone through that. And that has really helped him to open up, because he knows that the information is so helpful and useful.
I do have a couple of additional things. I agree with everything. One is that as I get older, the idea of legacy and knowledge and family stories is very important. And that's one way, is to, you know, ask them to tell you the story, because otherwise it would be lost to their children or grandchildren. The second one is the idea of stigmatization. And I think a lot of times people don't talk about a lot of traumatic experience because of the feeling of stigma. And I try to normalize that by saying, you know, I actually, you know, my conversation with my dad half the time is, why are you worried about that? Why are you ashamed of that? Why do you think people are gonna, you know, think worse of you because you say some, you know, you tell this story or that story? So that's important. And then the last thing is that I think fundamentally, what we're talking about here is the mental health of the Vietnamese American community, the ability to be able to look at trauma and talk about it. And I think it's not just about the stories. It's about addressing, you know, why do we feel the way we do, why we treat each other the way we do, whether or not we're talking about it.
On that same kind of note, or the similar kind of note of talking to our parents, and I mean, most of you, if not all of you, I think are also parents. We have a question from Jeffrey who asks, is it worth the effort to try to engage our conservative community locally on racism, Black Lives Matter, or defunding the police, and risk the backlash and death threats, right? Or is our energy better spent mobilizing those already more towards our side? So how can we bring our community with us if that is what we need to do?
I don't think you're going to convince the people who are Trump supporters, but I think that it is worth it to respond and to give factual information to counter the misinformation, because there are people out there who are not, you know, far to the right, and they may just hear only one side. So it could be worth it to spend some time to give the information, or at least your perspective, because I mean, that's what I do in political strategy, right? So I go in and see, okay, these are the people who are with me, these are the people who are against me, who are the people in the middle, what do they need to know? And I think we have to apply that strategy to the Vietnamese community. Right now, what I'm finding is that there's a small group, a really vocal group, who are very Trump supporting and very vocal about it. And then there are a group of people in the middle who are just like, I really don't know too much. But they're only hearing from the Trump supporting people. And I think that's the problem. We need to continue to amplify our messages and make sure that we continue to fight and counter those, just the blatant disregard for facts. And I think that's somewhat of more of an effort there. And just to try to remind folks of that there are still shared interests and shared values, and let's try to find those. I still have not found a, you know, a successful strategy, but these are the things I've been thinking about as well.
So I would say I actually do this for a living, persuasion in health, because we do health research, and a classic strategy for health promotion is to segment people into where they are in their thinking. So the classic thing is called the stages of change, where people are from what they call pre-contemplative to contemplative to, you know, preparation and action. And the communication has to be different. So if someone who's pre-contemplating, in other words, we're talking to someone who's smoking and they don't ever want to think about quitting, the last thing you want to do is tell them to stop quitting, to stop smoking, because it actually generates a negative reaction. What you have to do with those people is to generate what we call cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance means simply asking them a bunch of questions, so that they, when they're answering the questions, they end up in a place where they're saying two contradictory things. And then they go home and they're like, why did I say that? What is it that am I thinking about that forces me in this situation where, on the one hand, I love, you know, Vietnamese and refugees, and on the other hand, I'm supportive of people kicking out, you know, undocumented immigrants. I'm not saying that all of them will come to that conclusion, but you have to be very skillful at asking the questions. You don't tell them what to do. That's the worst thing you can do. Whereas somebody who's more preparation or contemplative, where they're thinking, oh, geez, you know, maybe Trump's not so good, or maybe I have quite some doubts here, then you provide them a different set of information or a different set of action. So we need to be conscientious. The other thing that we have to be aware of is, even though you're having these conversations and it doesn't seem to be changing anybody's mind, that's actually very important, because you're normalizing, because for decades, it's always been the other side that has the conversation. So you're standing up and saying anything is adding to the whole, you know, dynamic of, hey, Vietnamese Americans are a majority not for this. You know, let's be clear, you know, you can take your minority position if you want, but you cannot claim it to be the majority position. We are the majority.
I also, yes.
Go ahead,
oh no, I was gonna say, I mean, today's session is on art, activism, and advocacy. One of the questions we have is, how effective is art in raising awareness of different political issues and mobilizing the masses to respond to them? And I also want to spotlight UNAVSA, which is the Union of North American Vietnamese Student Associations. And through DVAN's work and UNAVSA's work, we're very diasporic in nature, right? So Crystalville asked, what are some of the examples of art that have reached and mobilized the Vietnamese diaspora in North America or abroad?
Am I supposed to answer that and toot my own horn?
I'll direct that one at T and at Viet.
I think art is a great Trojan horse, to keep using that expression. Sometimes we get a little bit scabbed over, our hearts scab over, when we hear the same kinds of like political language over and over again. And art provides you with different words, different vocabulary for talking about the same things. So if you can make, you know, immigration or, you know, whatever political issue, a story with characters that people can care about, people see through the lingo and like remember the issue, the heart of the story, right? And they can relate to the people. I think we care about our families, and we care about our loved ones, and we care about people we know. So for me, storytelling is a vehicle for bringing the issues closer to you, making the people that are normally just statistics, people that you care about and want the best for, even if they're not perfect people. And that's the thing about being human, right? Is none of us is perfect, and none of us should have to be perfect in order to have civil rights, just like everybody else. We're all just trying to live together. And that's basically the story, right? We're a very mixed up country with a very, very fucked up background, but we're trying to figure out how to live together peacefully here. And the people in charge don't want that. They're pitting us against each other, and we have to see past that story and figure out this other story of how do we live together peaceably. So art's really good at changing the narrative and getting people to see things in a new way, I think.
I am on my second drink today. So now this is something you can do as a writer, you can't do as a politician, okay? It's very liberating in a lot of ways. And so, of course, everything T said is true. We do art. Number one, those of us who are artists do art because we love the art. We love the beauty of it. We love the practice of it. We love the rigor of it. We even love the pain that's involved with creating art, because it is very painful much of the time. And then we create the art and we connect with people. And we do that through the beauty of what it is that we create. And when it comes to telling stories, we do it through creating empathy. We create characters, we put them into difficult situations, and if we do our job right, then our readers feel for these characters. And so this is one of the most crucial functions of what we do as Asian American or Vietnamese American writers. We take these stories that are not often heard outside of our communities. We put them onto the page or on screen or whatever. We can share them both with our communities, but also with other people as well, to get them to think about what it is that we have been through. Our starting point as artists is always that we're already human. But the starting point for a lot of people who are not like us is that we're not human. They do not have any idea how to relate to us, what our experiences have been, what our parents' experiences have been. So art is really crucial in creating this sense of empathy and knowledge for people like us. Now, that being said, we start from the assumption that we're human. We don't start from the assumption that we have to prove our humanity. If you're a white person in this country, you don't have to prove your humanity to anybody. You just start from the assumption that you're human. And from there, you can tell really stupid stories, or you can tell really complex stories in which people like you appear doing complicated things. And this is absolutely crucial for the work that, I think Vietnamese American storytellers and Asian American storytellers have to do. Our job is not to make Vietnamese people look good. Our job is not to stress the victimization that Vietnamese people have been through. Our job is to do what all other artists and writers do, which is to portray us in our full complexity, which means sometimes we do great things, good things, heartwarming things, and other times we do terrible things. And we can be the same person and do both those kinds of things. And if you've grown up in a Vietnamese community, in a Vietnamese family, surely you have seen this taking place in your families and with your loved ones. Our job is not to hide those things. Our job is not to not air our dirty laundry. Our job is to fly that dirty laundry like a flag, because that is actually what makes us human. So our tasks can overlap with the tasks that politicians and advocates have, but not the same, because we have to do certain things to be true to ourselves that sometimes perhaps advocates and politicians might need to shy away from for various kinds of reasons. But if we are faithful to our art, faithful to our principles, faithful to truth and justice, then we can produce something that really resonates. And as my brother Tung, or for some of you, Bac Dong, has said, this is the crucial work that we do, not just to lecture people, but to get them to engage with a story, engage with questions that will throw them into crisis. Sometimes we read a book because we want to feel good, and sometimes we read a book and we don't anticipate that it's going to put us into crisis because it challenges our fundamental knowledge of ourselves. And that is what art should do. Art can make us feel good. That's great. I read books that make me feel good, but I also want to read books that throw me into crisis, because it's only being in crisis that I can look at myself again and grow. And that's basically what we're challenging the Vietnamese American community to do with our politics. We want them to grow. We don't want them to just sit there and say, look, you know, just affirm the Vietnamese American community, tell the story of all we've been through, fluff us up as immigrant model minority success stories. No, I mean, that stuff is important, but we also want to challenge them to think about what kinds of privileges that they might have in relationship, for example, to Black people and to Black Lives Matter. And that is, in fact, producing crisis and producing really generative, if difficult, conversations.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for that, T and Viet. And I definitely do think that the model minority and this idea of white adjacency is anti-Black, right? And that's such a big issue in our community that we're seeing today. A couple of questions from the Q&A, and we're running close on time, but I think we'll be okay if we run a little bit over time, is that you all mentioned your processes of politicization and radicalization rooted in past political waves in the United States, such as the Rural Liberation Front, your work at both T and V, you mentioned UC Berkeley, Go Bears. So how do you evolve your understanding to respond to newer movements today? And how do you stay updated and keep learning as Vietnamese Americans, but also as Diasporic Vietnamese folks?
You listen, and then you accept flaws that, like, as the theme you've seen repeated here, we're all flawed individuals. None of us is one-dimensional, none of us is perfect. And I continue to learn and I continue to question my own biases, and we have to do an inner reflection. And even now, going back to the, you know, the work that we're doing at this moment in response to Black Lives Matter and working towards a police reform bill, I help amplify the voices of my Black and brown colleagues, because they're the ones with the lived experiences. They're the ones dealing with this issue, not only for themselves, but for their family members. And my job is to work with them and understand what is important to them, what's important to us, and try to reconcile that and make sure that I continue to put their voices at the forefront. And that's how I learn, and that's how we stand together in solidarity. And, you know, just to talk a little, go back to the earlier point of making sure that we're not only elevating the good, the bad, and the not so good, the in between. I think it's just so important for us to have frank conversations like this as a community, to talk about how we're contributing to the racism as well. Not only dismantling the anti-Blackness, but being silent is being complicit. You know, talking about that, what does that mean, and how do we address that? And so it's a learning process for all of us. I encourage all of us to continue on this journey.
Yeah, before I was a cartoonist, I was a public school teacher in high schools for about a decade. And the thing about being a teacher is you don't lecture. Being a good teacher is listening a lot to your students, and I learned a lot from working with youth for so long. So I continue to listen and use what I hear to inform my art practice, my political views. Try to examine my own biases and not so much be ashamed of them as like learn and grow and get better. You know, and if I've done harm, to apologize for that or make amends and try to like make things better for the people that I've harmed, not just like, you know, say stupid apologies that don't mean anything, but are just there to try to make myself feel better about myself. So I see myself in service to other people. I just want to use my time on earth to be useful to other people and try to make this planet better for everybody. And to use my voice and my platform, whatever level it's at, to influence people for the better. But I think in my heart of hearts, I'm still an educator, and so I feel that everyone can change, even the worst people. I might not spend I might not put all my eggs in that basket of trying to convince, you know, Vietnamese American Trumpists to change their minds, but I do have hope that people can grow and change. And then that's the belief that I have to hang on to as an educator, because if I didn't have that as a public high school teacher in America, I'd be screwed. So I'm just going to hold on to that and hope that it translates into the political arena.
I wanna bounce back at both you, T, and Tung. We have a question from Claire Nguyen, and I know we're going to go over a little bit over time, but we still got almost 250 people that are listening in very intently to what you all have to say, right? But Claire asks, or Claire mentions that she really connected to T how you framed the best we could do around this narrative of mothers and the crucial role of Vietnamese women in our history. And she mentions that Vietnamese and Vietnamese diasporic society and culture have been very patriarchal. And a lot of the movements that we're seeing now are fronted by men. So if both of you could speak to how we can amplify the voices of women in this movement work, I think that would be so critical and so essential to the work that we're doing moving forward.
We give the mic to the women, right, Jem? Like, there's so many powerful women in charge, actually. So I think we give the mic to them and let them speak.
Right, and of course to again speak out when you see the sexism that's just so blatant in our community. When Viet mentioned that the attacks are not just because I support Black Lives Matter, but the fact that I'm also a woman. There's a Vietnamese senator here who's actually a Trump supporter, but interestingly also supports Black Lives Matter in a way. And he never dealt with the same attacks that I did, calling me these terrible names. And so when Viet pointed that out, that was great. When other people in the community pointed that out, we had that conversation. Why is that so? And how do we continue to elevate and work together to elevate each other's voices? And so that's what I am continuing to do. And we need to invest in making programs available so that Vietnamese American women, Asian American women have a platform and a place to grow their strength and learn to cultivate their voices. And so one of the things I did was this first session, I got into the budget $100,000 for an Asian American women's political initiative to train Asian American women to be staffers at the State House so that they can learn the skill sets to then perhaps maybe run for office at a later time. But it's not just standing with the women, but making concrete actions to make sure that they have the resources that they need to lead and speak up.
Thank you all so much. We are running close on time for this morning. But I do want to ask one last question to everyone. For everyone listening out there this morning, what advice would you leave prospective artists, activists, and advocates moving forward? And do you have any last words of wisdom for all the folks listening in?
I go first. I actually have another big giant community meeting I'm supposed to be at right now. So I will say, we talk about a lot of the A's here, art and advocacy and all that stuff. The word authenticity comes up, and I think that's the unifying theme. And to me, to be a true Vietnamese American, what does that mean? We all have our own definition, but it's about telling us stories about ourselves and then to act on that. So to me, advocacy and activism is simply the acting on your authenticity, your authentic self. It's not something special. People will think about it as something extra or something you need to make time for. I don't think that's true. I think if you know who you are and what you care about, then all you do is act on it. That's all we're asking you to do. and if act on it, maybe not act on it alone, but act on it with others. That's what advocacy is. That's what activism is. So I'll make a big pitch for Pivot. We are an all volunteer organization. We're all donating our time. T's donating her time. Viet's donating his time. Philip is doing it. Everything that we can accomplish depends on how many people are helping us and the skills that they bring and how much time they give us. So please, we're bilingual, we're multi-generational, we're multi-talented. We talk a lot because we believe strongly in changing the dialogue, but we also walk the walk by supporting our candidates and advocating for our policies. We want to collaborate, elevate, and synergize. So please, if you care and you have time and energy, please join us, Pivot Network /join-us. Thank you.
I want to give a shout out to the organizations that have helped me in my research and my advocacy and have pulled me into advocacy work. We've been doing this work for far longer than I have. I'm sorry, I have 6. Can I Can I shout out all of them, Philip? All right. So Asian Prisoner Support Committee is an Oakland-based organization that does incredible reentry work and started an ethnic studies program inside San Quentin that is amazing. Asian Americans Advancing Justice in Atlanta is another amazing organization. Nguyen, another pivot member, is the Asian American lawyer that I talked about who pulled me into advocacy work. Asian Health Services based in Oakland with their one of their pet projects, Bante Sre, is a program that fights for Southeast Asian girls who are at risk for sex trafficking and abuse. Asian Americans Advancing Justice Asian Law Caucus is the San Francisco-based organization that does a lot of immigration defense and deportation defense work. And then I'm blanking on my last, Southeast Asian Coalition is one of my favorite super grassroots groups in Charlotte, North Carolina that does amazing intersectional work. They originally, I think, were there to support Southeast Asian youth, but now they support Black youth as well. And when I visited them, they were doing some of the most beautiful work that, you know, brings communities together for doing direct action. And they're like probably the most supportive of trans youth that I've seen in Southeast Asian groups that I've worked with. And we have links to all of them somewhere, right, Philip?
Yes, we are going to, DVAN staff are going to drop the links into the chat so that all of y'all watching right now can volunteer, can join, can donate, support, whatever it is. And then, Tram, I'm passing it to you for your org spotlights as well.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned to you, I was an attorney with Greater Boston Legal Services, but for them, they have an Asian outreach project, which is where I started and learned my advocacy. And actually, TU should look into them. They do a lot of deportation work, and especially a couple of years back when we were very concerned about Cambodian and Vietnamese deportees. And they do a lot of other advocacy work for low-wage workers and victims of domestic violence, et cetera. And also the Asian Task Force Against Domestic Violence is one of the only shelters and domestic violence organization focused specifically on Asian Americans or Asian victims or survivors rather. And I worked with both of them closely when I was working as an attorney and getting ready to run for office. And just a final note to folks, don't be afraid to reach out to your elected officials. I keep like I said before, and I keep saying it, we really need to hear your voices, because I know the voices that continue to come to me, and these are the voices that are getting policies that are beneficial to them. That's a problem. We all need to continue to speak up, and it doesn't even need to be anything extensive or even well-researched. You just have to reach out to your legislators to let them know where you stand on any particular issue, because sometimes we just want to be able to say, like, the community is a yes on this, the community is a no on this. These are the concerns that that matter to them. And the other thing to remember is that the State House, most government buildings, is the people's house. And it's so sad to me that my family, the very first time that they ever stepped foot into the Massachusetts State House was when I got into office and was sworn into office. Why is that? Who are the other people who continue to go into these state houses like they own the place? We need to continue to encourage that sort of, you need to be brazen. You need to remember that we have a voice and we need to use it, and we need to use it together.
Yes, don't fight for scraps, take over the case.
Correct, but so thank you so much for everyone for inviting me to be here. I'm so glad that Tung invited me and I got to know all of you. Please stay in touch. My contact information is on there. You can go to my website to email me as well, but I would love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, John. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to our host, Viet, if you have any words of wisdom that you'd like to impart on the future artists, activists, advocates of the world, and to close us on out.
Well, obviously, I think it's important to have a sense of conviction about what you believe in. Hopefully your sense of conviction is about truth and justice and equality. And it's also crucial to be honest to yourself, you know, to listen to your inner voice. When your inner voice is telling you, don't do something, don't say something, maybe you should listen to it. But all of this is predicated, of course, on being educated and being aware. Don't listen to your inner voice if you're ignorant. If you're ignorant, then educate yourself, expand your knowledge, know where your wisdom is lacking, and educate yourself. So, you know, for me, when it comes to Black Lives Matter, I know I still have more to read, but I've spent a lot of time reading African-American studies and Black writers and so on. So there's some knowledge there. I'm teaching a graduate seminar starting in a few weeks, and the topic is decolonization, because I felt like the emphasis that we have right now, you know, on this slogan that we hear often, representation matters, is crucial, but it's not enough. Representation is not enough. It's fantastic that we have people like Jum in office, but representation has never been enough. Politicians and elected officials are crucial, but they have never been enough without social movements and the actions of people just like yourself. And what that ultimately leads to, I think, is thinking about how do we decolonize American society, that we are a country built on colonization. And so many of the privileges that we have as Vietnamese immigrants and refugees and Vietnamese Americans is built on a legacy of colonization that we accept and we take for granted. So I'm trying to educate myself on this history, educate myself on what it means to be an immigrant or a refugee in this country built on the genocide of Native peoples and the expropriation of Native lands. That's why the course is on decolonization. There's always more that we have to learn about and to educate ourselves about. And I want to thank all of our panelists, Jam Nguyen, Thi Bui, and Tak Tung, for being here with us and sharing their knowledge and their experiences and sharing their passion with us as well. I just want to say one last thing before we give it over to DJ Puzzle, which is we have another show lined up. And this next show will definitely be in the evening, and there will definitely be a lot of booze on this show as we welcome the musician Thao Nguyen, who hopefully you have listened to. She is one of the coolest Vietnamese Americans out there. We're going to welcome her to talk about her music, her career as an artist, and about the movie she did about herself, her mother, and her family and their return to Vietnam. Date to be established. It will be happening later in August, and we hope to see you there. Meanwhile, if you happen to be people with money, please do make sure to donate to Jum's campaign and to Pivot and to DVAN. If you don't have money, but if you have time, join one of the organizations that we have talked about, from Pivot to DVAN to the other kinds of advocacy organizations that Jum, Dong, and T have mentioned. So thank you for being with us. Thank you, Philip, for being the MC for this event. Thank you in advance, DJ Puzzle, for your contribution. You make this show really energetic and much cooler than it would be without you. Share with us in the last few minutes as we say goodbye to you, and DJ Pivot. 2 drinks, people. Look at this, 1.5 drinks. Okay, DJ Puzzle leads us out.
And during the few moments that we have left, we want to talk right down to earth in a language that everybody here can easily understand.
Not hearing the music, DJ Puzzle.
Bump it.
What do you see?